here to share with you is key tools for field leadership. And I'm going to start right now by doing one of the 3 things we're going to learn about today. I'm going to give you my leader's intent for this session. So listen closely and even consider taking notes. You are going to learn in this session how important it is to be listening for key things in leader's intent and making mental or written notes. So here's a signal for you to consider taking some notes on my leader's intent. Okay, our task today is to learn about 3 things: leader's intent, field briefings, and after action reviews. Our task today is also to make this a varied learning environment. So I definitely welcome you to send questions and comments on this material in the chat box. I want for you to squeeze as much as you can out of learning about these things. So sending chats and comments in helps with that. And I'm going to ask for a few times for people to share out loud for the group. So be ready to volunteer to do that. That's how you get more out of these things, is if you speak up, so that we all learn from each other here. Not just from me, but from each other. Another task today is to prepare to practice your own leader's intent, and also plan ahead to be ready for field briefings and AARs, after action reviews. The purpose of all of this, these things, here's the purpose. These 3 things that we're going to learn about, which are essentially leadership tools and communication tools, these will set you up to be a stronger field leader. I want for you to be effective and a confident leader. I don't know each of you here, but I know you're here in all likelihood as a wilderness, wildland, and scenic rivers or a trails person who leads others in conservation and stewardship work in some way. And I believe strongly in the value of the work that you do, and we need strong field leaders doing this work. So I want for you to have these tools to be a better leader. That's the purpose here. The end state, at the end of this session, what do we have for this? I don't remember. You will be ready, the end of this, you will be ready to use these tools to facilitate your leadership work. You will be ready to support others who are also trying to lead. So whether you're the leader yourself or you're supporting someone else, you're going to be better prepared to do that. And you're going to be ready to lead as a wilderness, wild and scenic rivers and trails field leader, all right? So that was a leader's intent there. We're going to learn more about leader's intent. Let's get going. Leader's intent, it's a crucial element of effective leadership in field operations because it can reduce internal friction. It can empower subordinates, the people that work for you. And it can empower them to make smart, effective decisions when you're not even with them. A good leader's intent comes up front and it's offered early. Like I just did, I did a leader's intent at the very beginning of this, and it can help you when there are chaotic conditions that get in the way of a chain of command communication. This is what skilled leaders do, is that they focus on finding ways that reduce internal friction, that empower find ways to empower their subordinates and facilitate good communication. So that was a little bit of an overview of leader's intent here, but let's take a little more of a look at it. Leader's intent, in short, it's a method of communication that allows a leader of a group of people on a project. It enables the leader to clearly state what their goal is for the project and for the group, and say how and why it should be done and why it's being done. As I said, leaders do this up front and early so that they can guide everyone's actions through the rest of the day, rest of the project, the rest of the hitch, rest of the situation, what have you. And there are 3 essential components. I'm going to show those essential components in up next year, I believe. So get ready to take some notes on them. All right. Here is what they are. Okay. Here are the 3 essential elements. It's task, purpose, end state. And if you are even capable of memorizing those things, that's even handier, all right? So what is task? Task is a description of what needs to be done. What you want people to do. What is the task that needs to be done? And then you go to purpose. Why does it need to be done? Why is it important? What is the context behind it? What is the history behind it? Okay. Why are you asking this person or these people to do this thing? And you might explain some of and I want you to do it in this specific way sometimes. You might be saying something there, so you provide some why behind that, the purpose of why you're saying, use this tool, not this tool, kind of a thing. And then last, there's end state. You want to share what it should look like when the project is finished, or when the day is finished, or when the situation is wrapped up, okay? And part of the reason for that is if nothing else, if one of the tools breaks, or if something unexpected happens, maybe that group or that person still has the capacity to actually get the project done. And you've explained to them that they can, you've given them maybe a vision on how they can get to that end state, even if something went awry with the plan, okay? So a good description of what it should look like when it's done is important. I need to check my slides here. I just want to see what's coming up. Okay. I'm scanning here a little bit. So I want to give a couple examples of leaders' intent. Here's a sort of made up situation for actually, I wrote this as if I was giving a project assignment to a partner, to a Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation that I work with, to one of their crew leaders. Okay, so here would be my version of a leader's intent for that person, for that crew leader. The task is for you to lead a one-day volunteer trail clearing project in the Great Bear Wilderness on the Stanton Lake Trail. Your task is to keep everyone together, safe, and do some meaningful trail work, and ensure that the volunteers learn a few ways to appreciate the wilderness and trail stewardship in that day. You, of course, are permitted to pass on some down trees while you're clearing that might be beyond your group's capacity, but I hope you are able to clear the trail today. The purpose today is that the Forest Service, we would like your group to clear this trail because we're going to prioritize our work somewhere else. And the volunteer group is a good match for this trail because it's easy to drive to this trail. It's easy to travel along as well. It's also a very popular trail. So your group working there and demonstrating stewardship will be both meaningful for the public to see a trail steward there, but also I think the volunteers themselves will get some gratification out of the work that others are seeing them do. And also, if there are some down trees which are beyond the capacity of your group to clear, don't worry about it. It won't be difficult. We can go back and work with some more skilled sawyers later on, provided you come back with some detailed notes on that situation. Okay, the end state for you, ideally, that trail is cleared by the end of the day by the volunteer group. And if not, what still needs to be cleared will have a good size up. The volunteers, the end state is that they should have a sense of accomplishment and appreciation for the trail, Stanton Lake, and the Great Bear Wilderness. Also, the end state is that everybody returns safely at the end of the day, because that's the most important thing, isn't it? Okay, so that was a short leader's intent statement for a sort of field situation. Did you get it? Does that make some sense to you? Okay, I'm going to drop in the chat here the slide that you see on the screen, so you have that for your reference. Stand by while I pull that up. It takes me a minute to navigate over to that.
And Colter, I've put the polls back in, at least the next two, so we will have polls.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for working on that, Bill. Okay, what's coming your way is a PDF of that slide. I hope you're able to download it and use it. If not, your written notes will suffice. And I am going to take us off of this slide here, so get those notes written up because very shortly here we're going to practice with this. Okay, so we're moving on. Thank you, Jay, for that feedback. Okay, so a little more now that you know the bones of leader's intent, why should you use one? Well, it's a great communication tool to use during a dynamic situation, or when you're deep in the backcountry and you're several days out from talking to your supervisor. And it works well when you are not with your crew, or if you're separated from your supervisor, you can call up and remember, oh, their leader's intent was this. When there's new information that has happened. I mean, I'm thinking of like my group, they work on 8-day hitches. And what I said on day one, and then they headed off to the backcountry, that very well could change due to weather, just changing conditions, but they still have they got a leader's intent that if I crafted it well, they will be able to still evolve and roll with the circumstances. So that's a part of that dynamic environment that I'm talking about. And it allows for new information to be incorporated into the original planning, and it allows people to redirect if that's reasonable. A leader's intent is provided so that people can adapt plans, exercise initiative. And I want to focus on the exercise initiative part. It's, so this other thing happened, and that's a new situation. I remember that the end state was this. I think we can address this new situation and still get to our end state. And that person who's thinking along those lines is showing initiative on how to be adaptable and deal with a new situation while still getting to the goal. And it allows people to incorporate unanticipated opportunities. So I'm thinking of, well, oops, that happened, but maybe if we reconfigure, we can do it in this other way. So leaders' intent can also reduce internal friction, as in, I don't know, I don't remember what that person wasn't really clear on what they wanted, or I don't even know why I'm doing this. And people who can be put out by that, well, leaders' intent can help reduce that friction point, and it empowers others around them. Okay, so those are some good reasons to use leaders' intent. You might be in a situation also where you receive a leader's intent from your superior and then turn around and provide it to the people you are leading. So think about that. You might be in a place to receive leader's intent and then pivot and share that out. So what kinds of questions and comments do you have about leader's intent? I'm going to keep my eye on the chat. What are you thinking about this at this point in time? Is there something that doesn't seem clear to you or gives you pause? I'm pausing to keep an eye on the chat here. Okay, not getting anything in there. Okay, so leader's intent, to reiterate in a sense, or help you learn it in a different way. Leader's intent is meant to preemptively answer these three big questions you see on the screen here. What needs to happen? Why am I doing this? And what should it look like when I'm done? Okay. So I want to ask, and if somebody's ready to come off of mute, I would be happy to hear, or you can put it in the chat. What kind of situations do you see yourself in where you would where you would use leader's intent? Who will share out on something they see coming their way that they could use leader's intent on?
On gang, let's hear from you. And Colter, we can do breakout rooms if you want. We got about 50 people, so we could do 5 rooms, 10 each if you ever.
Okay, thank you for that. I actually see a couple people on the line I'd like to reach out to if I don't get a volunteer.
That means you're about to be volunteered, folks.
Yeah, I'd like to check in with Eric G. Can you share with us how you could see using leader's intent in the work that you do? And please share with us the work that you do. Eric, are you able to come off of mute? No, maybe not. Well, how did I pick the one person who couldn't? Rebecca, you've come off of mute. Will you share with us your thoughts on this?
I did. I was going to step in here. Yeah, I think, so I work for Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards. I'm the new field operations coordinator who oversees the trail crews as well as a couple of other things. And I think in using leaders' intent, like I could do that in all of my jobs, even though I'm not exactly out on the trail with the crews anymore, in explaining to them all the things that you've said, like why they're heading to certain areas, why the work needs to be done, why we need to continue building partnerships with the Forest Service and others. And then of course our crew leads kind of pass that on.
Excellent. So you're giving an example of where you would provide leaders' intent to crew leads and then they would pivot and provide a leader's intent to all the groups the people they're working with. So it's sort of a relay example there. Thank you. Let's go to Jay. And Carla, I see you've come off of mute. We'll go to Carla after Jay.
Everyone, my name is Jay Harita. I work as one of the lead field rangers.
Jay, are you still there? We lost your audio.
Jay, I think you went back on mute, maybe.
Oops, sorry about that. I seem to be having some connection issues. Am I coming through all right?
You're good right now, but if we lose you again, how about you put your comments in the chat and I'll read them out loud for you. Sounds
good. Lead field ranger for a crew of rangers here in Oregon, and I love the conciseness of this format. A lot of times I receive orders or instruction that's either too long or too vague. But this is that nice balance. So I can imagine if I'm out there in the field getting instruction, I can take the information that I'm getting and put it into this format and then regurgitate it to the person that I'm getting the instruction from, just to clarify exactly what needs to be done. And then take that format to the crew that I'm working with. So very, very good tool that works both ways, I think. Thank you, Jay. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Let's check in with Carla.
Hi, Colter. Good information. I'm a director with Northwoods Volunteer Connection. So we bring volunteers into the Superior National Forest and the Boundary Waters. So for me, this is good information as far as in relaying the information to our crew lead. And then I'm glad this is taped. I'm going to share this session with our crew leader because in our tailgate sessions, this will be information she relays to the volunteers to provide information about the projects.
Excellent. Thank you for those voices that spoke up. It's helpful for us. It's helpful for everyone else to hear how you envision using this. So everyone learned from your leadership there. I appreciate those of you who spoke up. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to our next slide here. So here's another question to learn from each other on. Have you been in a situation where leader's intent was not clear? Now that you look back on it and you know how leader's intent can be helpful, can you think of situations where you weren't given a leader's intent and you were confused on the task, you were confused on the purpose, you were confused on the end state? How could you gain by using, here's the next question. How could you gain or receive or figure out leader's intent if it's not initially provided to you? Okay, what if you didn't get that leader's intent statement? What if I didn't give it at the start here? What could you do to still pull together a leader's intent if you needed that information? Does anybody want to share a thought on that? I'll give you the answer, but if anybody wants to theorize on how you can figure out leader's intent if it wasn't given to you. Okay, I'll go ahead and just answer the question here. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Share. I think one of the big lessons I've already gotten from this is sometimes we stop at the most simple answer of what we think the intent for the day is. In your example of the clearing Stanton Lake Trail, if you just stop there and you don't accomplish the task, you actually don't finish the task because you made the clarity of and what you can't do either because of time or complexity in the level of the Sawyers is to bring back the data so that then you can act on it. Like that was a sort of a second task, equal task to the clearing the trail if possible, right? So
yeah, and in that example, our goal was to get the trail cleared. Hopefully that group does it, but if they can't, we'll find a way with the information they bring back to get it cleared by someone else. And that's what gets the trail cleared. That was the actual goal. It wasn't for that group to get it all done. It was to facilitate the circumstances to get that trail cleared here. Okay, so here's how I want to answer the question. How can you gain leaders' intent? How can you figure that out if it's not provided to you? Well, the answer is you should be listening for those three elements. When a leader is communicating to you, you can sift through and listen to what they're saying and extract out task, purpose, end state, okay? So sometimes as a supervisor, I myself, I do try to be intentional in saying, hey, leaders intent time. But other times I'm not very good about it because I've got things on my mind and I'm distracted and I might not be that direct. But I do try to get to all of those points. So the people listening to me need to be listening for those points from me. Okay. You as a person who's receiving a leader's intent, you can also ask or clarify. You can say, time out, can we check in on why we're doing this? I just want to know the purpose of it. And you can also say, what's this supposed to look like when this is done? Sometimes I myself as a supervisor, when I give leaders intent, sometimes I get so wound up on the purpose part of leaders intent, I actually forget to give the end state. And so I appreciate it when someone says, so Colter, what does it need to look like when this is done? Oh yes, thank you. Let me get to that. All right. So you should always be listening for somebody giving you the pieces of leaders intent, and you can build that up and you can ask and clarify. I just want to make sure I got that part out, okay? And make sure you're on the same page there. So you don't sit and wait for someone to say, leaders intent time. You can build it out while you're listening, okay? So we're going to do an activity here for a minute. Oops, all right. I just wanted this slide to be sequenced here. What I want for you to do right now is I want you to find a piece of paper or use your computer screen, whatever. We're going to take 5 minutes. We're going to set a timer here in a minute. And I would like for you to write out a short leader's intent for a situation you have been in before or expect to be in soon, okay? So don't make it complicated. Don't overthink it. Just find a simple situation that a leader's intent would be useful for, all right? Write your task, write your purpose, write your end state. Take that time to write it out here and craft that up. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. It's 56. I'm going to check in with you at 1 past. Don't drop the line. We're just going to have a moment of silence here, all right?
I've started a timer, an actual
Okay,
timer.
thank you, Bill.
15 minutes.
Okay, I'm just going to give a reminder to the group. We're wanting you to write a leader's intent, okay? That's why we're being silent here.
2.5 minutes, everybody. About 50 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to ask that you start to wrap up your quick leader's intent. And as you're doing that wrap up, hey, you know what? I routinely have to do leader's intent statements on the fly. Having time to sit down and put your thoughts together, that's a luxury for some of us at least. So as you get more comfortable with leader's intent, I mean, I think it's good practice to sit down and be thoughtful for a minute, and I should do that always myself, but sometimes as you get more comfortable with it, you can do these things on the fly too. So okay, so now that you have a rough draft of a leader's intent for a situation that you expect to see or have experienced recently, we are going to do some breakout groups for you to practice. All right, so we are going to send you into breakout groups, and here's how that's going to happen here. You're going to rotate around in your breakout group and give your quick leader's intent. Plan that you each have 5 minutes in the group to do your leader's intent. So it's a chance for you to practice giving your leader's intent, but also for those who are listening to that person's leader's intent, this is possibly the most important part. So don't tune out, people. You're going to learn a lot here. Pay attention, all right? When you listen to somebody else giving a leader's intent, you're going to start to pick up common themes here. You can also give them feedback to let them know, hey, I liked the way you put that, or boy, that one part didn't make sense to me. So you giving them active feedback will make them better leaders. And that's what leaders do, right? They support each other. So I want you to be an active listener when you do this. You may learn more by being an active listener. And you need to be asking yourself, am I clear on what they wanted me to do? Do you feel you were ready to go? Okay. So I'm going to do a leader's intent here for this breakout group. Focus, everybody. Your task is to practice and listen to leaders' intents in this breakout group. The why is you're going to get hands-on practice. That's what leaders do, is they practice stuff. And you're going to get to hear other people's and learn a little bit from them, okay? And give them support and feedback. That was the purpose. What this should look like when you're done, when you come back to the group, you should have practiced a leader's intent, giving one and listening to others and giving some feedback, all right? So thank you for practicing your leadership. I hope that was a good experience for you. Can I get a report out from some volunteers? What did it feel like to practice that first time with a group of people you don't even know? What was that experience like? Can I get somebody to come off of mute or raise their hand and tell us what it felt like to practice doing a leader's intent? Go ahead, Eric, and then we'll go to Louie.
Hey, Colter, sorry I missed you earlier. I just come into the room, so this is cool to like catch up real quick and figure out the context of everything. Yeah, so it was really interesting to think about it in this way, because there's so many when you're trying to develop staff, there's so many things that you want them to learn that it can be overwhelming, right? Like what you want them to really take away from the task. And so what I found with this exercise is that there's all of these like sub priorities, right? That you have to think through when developing these, and it's just really cool.
Thank you, Eric. Louie, you were going to share something. Let's check it out with you. Oh,
sure. I was in Eric's group, so hopefully I'm not too redundant, but just a nice reminder that oftentimes when we're working in our outdoor settings like we are, and like this community is a really good group of people to practice being a leader and to become a leader in. And some of the highlights that I found was kind of having multiple intents, whether it's like a season intent, a weekly intent, and then like an everyday intent, and kind of being able to split it up that way. And also having, Eric kind of mentioned, having multiple metrics for success within like your intent. And that was something that I hadn't really thought about, because I'm kind of cut and dry. Here's what we want done, but there's always different levels.
excellent. Okay, so what I part of what I heard you say there was it felt good to practice with people in your community. So that's part of the idea here today. Thank you. Okay, so leader's intent, everybody. Now you have a leader's intent framework to work with, and I hope you do use it. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slides. We are going to move on to our second of 3 tools for you to use as a field leader. Okay, so I'm going to sort of use a phrase interchangeably here. I mean the same thing. Okay, when I say field briefing checklist, I may also say an operational briefing. Okay, it's the same thing. It's a communication technique, and it's critical to safe field operations and efficient and effective leadership. It ensures that you use a consistent and effective communication style. It's a standardized briefing checklist that you can always use. It says it gives everybody in your group the same thing each time by habit. Nothing gets missed. And when there are different or new things, it helps people key in onto, okay, this is different this time. Here's what I need to pay extra attention to, that piece of that. So that's a little bit of background on field briefing checklists. Let's take a little bit of a closer look here, okay? So the purpose of a field briefing checklist is to get everybody organized and on the same page. It's a standardized system that benefits everybody, and it gets everything covered every time. You, as a listener, can, or as a person giving a field briefing, you can learn to anticipate different types of information and make better notes and be clear on that. The origin of field briefing checklist is actually from the interagency, incident response pocket guide, which is from the fire program, from the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. That's the image you see before you right now, but it's actually applicable to all of us in wilderness and wild and scenic rivers leadership work. Of course, in fire management, we know they deal with rapidly changing field conditions while trying to get their field work done, but so are we, of course, in wilderness, wild and scenic rivers work. And we can use the same system to be strong and effective field leaders. So for my program, we have modified the fires framework, their approach. So you see that over there on the right. That's what's in the interagency, or it's not interagency, it's incident pocket response guide. Anyways, we have modified what they use. Some of it from that original fire one is just not relevant to our work, like fire behavior. We don't need to know what the fire behavior is when we're doing wilderness and wilderness scenic rivers work. So we eliminated that. And other things were sort of generalized. We generalized some things. And anyways, we've adapted this. So that's the origin if you ever wanted to get back to that. But here's what we've come up with, all right? Here is the checklist that we use in the program that I work with. The point here, though, is that you can adapt this checklist to suit your needs. I imagine what I use for my program with the Flathead National Forest is probably different than what the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation would use exactly. And here's what I'm thinking. Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation works with some volunteers. They might want to have an extra checkbox around something that the volunteers need, but I'm not working with volunteers, so they might adapt theirs a little bit from what we have. But the point here is once you have your checklist together, you can follow it and always use a consistent approach for briefing the people that you work with. So I'm going to point out some of the major clusters here, and pointing out that this is how you keep the headers the same, but you can adapt as you want. Okay, so what is the situation? That's what your start. What is the project? What's the location? Do we have the map? Do we know where we're going? What's the terrain? What's the ecosystem? And what is the weather, right? Next up is the mission and execution side of stuff. Who is the project sponsor? Who's the supervisor? Who's the crew leader? Who are we working for? And then I put in red there just to highlight your attention there. That's when you also, when you're doing that checklist and briefing people, that's when you get to leader's intent, which we just practiced. Now you know that a little bit, you know that better, and you provide the overall objectives and the strategy. So we don't even need to spend more time on that. You already know it. You would then move on to specific assignments. Okay, Prairie, I want you to do this. Sephora, I want you to do this. Benton, this is your task at the end of the day. So that's when you give it specific mission assignments. You can also talk about your contingency plans. We think it's possible that this may happen today, so let's keep this in our back pocket, all right? You cover some safety stuff, which is a part of your mission. And then moving on to the column on the right, there's where you work through communication plan stuff. Oh, here's another example. Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, I know they use inReach devices. My program doesn't. So they might put in a little checkbox related to inReach. Is the inReach working? Is it, is it all configured up? Something like that. So there's an example of how you can adapt these for your program. And then you move on to service and support, like some coordination type of stuff. What do we critically need? Who do we need to talk to? Is there someone else we're reliant on? Some of that service supports stuff. And then the last there is risk management. You can incorporate your tailgate safety session or whatever other ways you have of identifying your risk management process, okay? So I'm gonna drop in the chat here this document for you if you wish to use it. Stand by for that. And again, I think you should, I'm sharing you mine, but I think you should be planning to adapt it to suit your program's needs or your situation's needs. Okay, there you go. It's waiting for you. Okay, what kind of questions or comments does anybody have about field briefing? I'd really like to hear from the people who say they've used them before and you're knowledgeable of them. What does yours look like? What's different about yours from this one? Tell us, give us a little flavor of what else they look like out there. I don't know who it was that chose those options, so I can't call upon you to share out, but I'd love to hear from you.
Great chance to engage here, folks. So please either hop in the chat or unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, for those who this is brand new to, here's the question I have for you. Is this something you see yourself using? How do you see yourself using this? At what point in a project or a hitch, or give us a little scenario that you would use this in?
I can our organization, I'm with Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards, and we use a similar type of document. We called it an emergency response plan. And we kind of basically, we outline most of these same things. But we do not have a section for leaders' intent, which might be a nice thing to add in. Yeah.
Okay,
But-
thanks, Matt, for sharing that. Yeah, a good chunk of this is about emergency and urgent situations, but look at that most of the first column is just like project oriented stuff, like all the things that should be happening before an emergency happens. So yeah, there's stuff there to make sure everybody understands who's who, what is the project, what are we doing, and what is the leader's intent before you get to that risk management type of stuff there. Thanks for sharing that you do have a version of this in your program. Anyone else have something to share about field briefing checklists? Go ahead, Eric.
We have another sort of similar thing for our volunteer days, and so it's a checklist of the pre-communication that you would have with the volunteers, what the beginning of the day looks like upon arrival, and then it's anywhere from start the tailgate safety session, welcome folks. I don't know exactly what's in there anymore, but basically it lines out the entire briefing, and then it's talks about setting goals for the day, and what defining success and getting out safely.
Thank you, Eric. And I see we got a couple comments in the box or in the chat. It looks like Rena or Rena. Hey, that's the great part. If you don't come off of mute, I butcher your name. So there's a good reason to come off of mute. So we hear you say your name properly. But anyways, you shared that you're wondering if this could be used for guided hikes. Oh yes, I'm sure. So you would want to adapt it for that audience. But yeah, I do see that. Cover safety, cover purpose, cover where you're going, make sure everybody knows where we are, kind of a thing. So, and Louis, you think this is a pre-hitch checklist? Yep, definitely pre-hitch checklist for sure. You would probably add a few things, I would think, if you're looking at it from, who's got the tools, who's got the water, stuff like that. So, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to add, I mean, this is field related, but you could apply this. I heard that there's another organizational leadership, or there's a few other organizational leadership people on here. I mean, the checklist for the day, having just things to have systems in place, because you get into rhythms and routines, and if you don't go back to the checklist, you can miss something. So having something like this with you in the field, laminated, is super helpful. But also having these for before you leave the cache to head out on a hitch.
Yeah. So I think where we're going here is like adding in some of the pre-hitch things that need to be tracked down and made sure they're loaded and stuff. That's definitely legitimate. I also want for you to think of this as a communication tool. So when you as the leader are ready to get everybody in a group and say, all right, we're ready to go here, or we're getting ready to go here, that you use this as a communication tool. This is our project. This is the weather. This is the contingency plan. This is our risk management thing. And so the people you work with, they get used to that pattern. And when the weather's different, they know they're going to pay attention. When they know that when it's time for contingency plan, they're okay, what's the contingency plan this time? It's different from last time. So please don't just keep this as something that's your person. It can have elements of that personal, I got to track this down, I got to do that. But this is the higher order here, is that this is a communication thing for you, and it keeps you organized as a leader and gives you like smooth communications, right? Okay, so all right, any last comments or questions on field briefing checklists? Again, emphasis on the briefing part there, that communication part of it. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next module. So last chance to speak up around field briefing checklists.
I don't know that it's been mentioned yet, but this would be a great opportunity to educate somebody that's joining the group late You know, a couple days into a hitch or something, you have a one or two new crew members, they got to be brought up to speed. This is a good way to get them there quicker.
Excellent, excellent vision there. I really like that. And that happens all the time, right? Someone had something else going on. They had a doctor's appointment. They joined the hitch later, 2 days later, kind of a thing. And you have your whole rhythm down. Everybody knows that stuff, but then that person shows up later and they're like, what's going on? And so it's a great way to effectively bring them up to date. I see a quote here in the chat. I'll read it out loud. Thanks for sharing it. I have 3 rules for leaders in the outdoors. You have to know where the people you're leading are coming from. You have to know what you want for them to do, what you want to do with them, and you have to love them. Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you. Field briefing is a part of loving them. It's sharing that information, getting everybody on the same page there. Thanks for sharing that, making the connection to field briefing. Okay, well, with that, let's move on to our last section here, after action reviews. It is essential for field leaders, for strong field leaders, to be able to learn from mistakes and capitalize on success, all right? This is what real leadership looks like, learning from mistakes and capitalizing on success. After action reviews help you do that, okay? The objective of an after action review, and timeout, I'm just going to start saying AAR from here on out. AAR is after action review. The objective of an AAR is to identify successes and failures from a project, a hitch, a situation. It doesn't have to be some kind of dramatic thing. It can be from just an ordinary hitch, all right? Once you've recognized successes and failures, you can then explore how to perfect the situation next time. And it prepares your group to be better for future endeavors. So you as a leader, committing to after action reviews, AARs, helps set your group up for future success, all right? It's a tool that leaders use to maximize benefit from every incident or project. Again, it feels like we often do AARs after dramatic circumstances, but this can be done after just as an ordinary hitch or an ordinary day, but a day that was successful, and you want to focus on capitalizing the success of that day. Let's make sure we do this again. This was good stuff, all right? You can use an AAR to get there. Leaders are ready to facilitate after action reviews. But also I want to point out that it sometimes is better for somebody else to facilitate an after action review. And if that's the case, the leader will find somebody else to do that. So consider that you don't have to necessarily be the person to do it, but that you know the value of an AAR and you can set up for someone else to do that. So just keep that in mind. You might not be the best person to do it in any particular situation. Okay, so we have our after action review graphic. This one is a little more dense than the leader's intent one, but I do hope you take some notes here. There's 4 major elements. And my personal pet peeve about AARs is people do not follow often these 4 elements. And so those who've done AARs before, it would not surprise me if, while you have been in one, if it didn't wander. It seems sometimes when we don't follow the framework here, they can turn into unfocused, even complaining session times rather than the proper way of doing it. And following it properly is how you get to that focus on here's what we can do better next time, rather than an unstructured gripe session. Okay, that's what we want to avoid, is an unstructured gripe session. So let's work through the bones of this. What was planned? Okay. Review it, review the intent. You might even review that leader's intent that was given when you're working on what was planned. You review who was assigned what were the key things, who was doing what, or who was responsible for what. And you review that end state. So that's where starting with leader's intent will help you do a better AAR afterwards. You might realize as you're doing the AAR, we can't identify what the end state was. Oh, that's where we went wrong. We didn't have a good leader's intent from the very beginning, okay? Once you've thoroughly done that, then you go to what actually happened, okay? Oh, wait, I wanna go back. A fatal flaw that people often fall for when what was planned, is that they abbreviate it. They shorten it. They'll say, yeah, the plan was to clear the trail. And that's all they say, like it's the most obvious thing. Okay, but back to that example I gave a while ago. The plan was to clear the trail, but there was also the come back with notes if you left trees down. There was also the make sure the volunteers learn some stewardship messaging. There was more than just clear the trail. So oftentimes people shorten and just abbreviate the what was planned part there. And if you're doing this properly, you make sure you flesh out fully all of the things that were planned beyond the obvious, all right? So then let's get to what actually happened. And this is where the storytelling can get kind of long when you're doing one, okay? But focus on the facts. What actually happened? Focus on, okay, I want to make sure that this person, when it says pool multiple perspectives, okay, well, maybe there was a situation on the trail and the people at the front of the line saw it happening from the beginning, and the people at the back of the line only caught up with what was going on later on, and they walked into the situation later. Well, you need to pool the perspectives of everybody in that rolling situation to make sure everybody understood what did actually happen, and to make sure that you can't account for the perspectives of people who weren't there at the start, okay? Another fatal problem here when people do AARs is they start to mix up what actually happened with why did it happen and bleed those things together, and that gets messy. So I want to urge you to keep your group focused on what actually happened before moving on to the why, because it can abbreviate that review of the facts. So try to keep yourself clean there. Say, we're not ready for why, let's focus on the what. So with that, let's focus on the why did it happen part there. Think about the cause and effect, focus on the what, not the who. So that's where you as a leader have to be careful that we don't start blaming that Eric is the one that caused all this problem. Let's say, okay, well, what, Eric, this happened because this situation Eric went through, find your way to not blame Eric for the problem, but just that this happened involving Eric, and this is the what, not so much the who, okay? And you sometimes when you're talking about that why, you have to cycle around it a few times and refine exactly, okay, well, this happened, Eric was involved in this, but what actually happened around that? Like what was the circumstance around Eric? It turns out Eric didn't have water all day. That's why Eric did that. We didn't realize that initially. It took us a while to get to that. Now we know why that happened to Eric, okay? It takes a while to work, and you have to cycle around and progressively refine the understanding there. Okay, and then the last part is, what are we going to do next time? So how do we document to correct actions, and also how do we capitalize on success? How do you sustain and maintain strengths? Okay, often we spend a lot of time talking about the negative. Well, let's not do that next time, but a healthy leader always makes sure to find some strengths, and that we're going to keep those going forward, okay? Last note here for me on after action reviews is that it's helpful to have someone else take notes, and someone, like I said, to help keep your group on track. It may be hard for you as a leader, as the group leader, to take notes and keep people on track. It's your responsibility as a leader to find other people to do that if it's too much, okay? You aren't necessarily the best person to do all those things, but you can find someone who is the right person to do that stuff. But you need to know the bones of a proper AAR to make sure it's properly done, okay? And now that you know how an AAR should be done, if you're in one that someone else is facilitating, you can be helpful to them by keeping the group on track. As I said, I wonder how many times, now that you know the bones of an AAR, you might look back and say, yeah, that's not the way that was supposed to go. That was just a gripe session. We called it an AAR, but that was a gripe session. Does anybody have that experience? Does anybody resemble that, as Eric says? I'm dropping in the chat for you this slide here, so you have that for your reference. Eli, you're saying you've been into a lot of those. I've seen a few yeses there. So now you look back and you realize, okay, AAR could have been a little healthier, a little more structured. Okay. What kind of questions do you have? Oh, an excuse session. That's good, Carol. That's really good. They can be that way. And really, it's because people focused on the what and why, and they go too quickly through what was planned and what are we going to do next time. That's how they go wrong, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm wondering if anybody has an example of when they have been in an AAR. I'd like to hear a few report outs, so that those who haven't been through one have a few examples of how AARs can be used. So could I get a few volunteers to report out? Yeah, I was a part of an AAR. Here was the situation. So looking for some of those people who said you had some experience with this to speak up and teach the rest of us, or let us learn from you a little bit. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, just because it's super fresh for me, the core team that's putting on the National Wilderness Skills Institute is every day having an AAR at the end of the day. And one of the great benefits is, like, for example, what was planned. It's not as simple as, oh, we plan to do a training session today. It was like, well, we had this one session where we had planned to show a video, but showing video from YouTube doesn't stream very well. And so having this every day has actually allowed us to iterate and get better each day, learn from each other of maybe things that happen. So literally doing one at the end of each day this week.
So that's good. Thanks for a peek behind the curtain there, Bill. For putting on this session. We're the planning team, the core team is using AAR structure. So thank you. Kyle, you have your hand up. Will you share with us?
Yeah, we do them quite often for prescribed fire, any fire down here in Florida. We have done them so much that we get a little bit, it's a standard 3-minute thing at the end because it happens so often. So we've started changing the types, trying to come up with different ways to do it. But the most insightful for me was we had what we thought was a bomb, but ended up being some kind of mock thing somebody had made. But I found it and I got involved. All of the county, state, explosives technicians, everybody from all kinds of different agencies came, and then we did our normal Forest Service AAR, and they were all very complimentary after the fact because they'd never seen anything like that. So something I've always been proud that we do.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing the pride in that too. Let's check in with Nathan. You put a comment in there. Nathan, if you're able to come off of mute, can you flesh that out a little bit for us? What that looked like doing one with MCC after your hitches?
Yeah, so we basically followed this style of AAR. They often try to reflect a lot on what each crew member learned at the through the hitch and what they improved on, anything that they found that maybe they didn't do as well or something that they could have worked with a little bit better. There's a lot of MCC is a lot about leadership building, and so there's a lot of additional lessons that were put into hitches, and so you'd often review those as well.
So you were doing them habitually after hitches, not in response to a dramatic situation. It was just part of your routine, it sounds like.
Yes to both. So if we had a good example would be any sort of chainsaw issues, if you had to hang up or anything like that, you'd typically do an AAR on the spot. You'd call a safety stand down and then do an AAR then, and then also talk about it at the end of the day, make sure everything's going well. And then habitually at the end of every hitch was that was required. And then the crew leaders would go back and work with staff at MCC to hey, this is what we completed this week, and if we had any interpersonal stuff that we had to work with and ask for help or stuff like that. That's where it came in.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for fleshing that out for us a little bit. Gray, your hand's up. Let's check in with you.
Yeah, so I have conducted, but also been a part of a lot of these after action reviews when I worked in wilderness therapy. So a little bit different, but also every staff team would have to conduct one of these with a senior level staff after every 8-day shift. And anytime that some form of incident, be it traumatic or, and I say that more an escalation of a student or something like that happened, you would have an individual after action review for that moment or that incident, and then for the entire week. And you would check out with, and that's what we call them checkouts.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So you would do it with your entire staff team, a senior level staff, and then you would also have to check out with the group's therapist. So debrief the entire week with them, and then with the entire staff team conducting of all other groups. So all of the leaders would come in and debrief their week, but also try and kind of like leave it on a higher level, like a good note, not just complaining, because that is one thing that we would see is people would get into complaining sessions, and that was always troublesome.
It can be just toxic at a certain point. You know, some people want to avoid, they'll hear AAR and they'll say, I don't want to go to one because they've had experience with them turning into gripe sessions. So that's a good point to make here, is be that person who makes sure that people have good experiences with AARs. Okay, so there's a question here on, can you describe the difference between an AAR and a debrief? That's a good question. Well, a debrief is more focused around what happened. An AAR is a little more full circle there. An emphasis on what are we going to do next time. A debrief would be you're telling somebody what happened. They may go back and decide what's going to happen next time, but you're not a part of that. Whereas an AAR is everybody gets to be involved in that and have a moment to reflect inside themselves on what am I going to do next time and what are we going to do next time. So for me, Eric, that's the difference between an AAR and a debrief. Debrief is sort of a one-way information sharing. AAR is information sharing, reflection, and planning for the future. Any last thoughts around AARs? Does anybody want to speak up on that or ask a question or make a comment about AARs? Okay, well, let's start to wrap this up. Should we do an AAR? I actually thought about doing that. Carol asked if I can drop the slide in the chat. I thought I did. Let me try again here. Here is the after action review slide coming to you. Okay, so for your reference, I pulled up the sources for leaders' intent, field briefings, and after action reviews. Our fire programs, they've been working with these for years, and so they have, you know, this is where this comes from. But like I said at the beginning, we can adapt this stuff for our use. We too work in the field, in the outdoors, in circumstances that change all the time, where we have limited communications. So these tools are useful in fire, and they are certainly useful for us. You may need to adapt things a little bit, but it's very useful for us too. Here's the question I want to check in with people on. Oh, I see I have a hand up here. Go ahead, Pete.
Thanks, Colter. Several folks have mentioned it. This is definitely something fire has been doing and has institutionalized pretty much at the end of every shift, you know, to make sure it's not just about when something dramatic happens. But as several folks point out, they can get pretty rote after a while. One alternative that I've seen described and actually used is called a chainsaw AAR. Has nothing to do with the tool, but it goes around and you open the what could we the last two parts of the AAR by asking everybody in the circle to give either one good thing or one bad thing that happened today. So it sort of forces participation. What are we going to do next time? You know, everybody has to give one takeaway.
Interesting. So so everybody's sharing what's something good and something fixed, what's something to fix and what's something to keep doing. Asking everybody to share that builds that up. Thanks, Pete, for sharing that idea. Okay. Well, anyways, so there's those websites there if you want to go back to the source information for you and study that and study the theory a little bit more. I'm down to my last slide, which is my beginning slide. I want to ask a couple questions for the audience. What are your big takeaways? What is something that you're like definitely doing that, or that was new to me? I liked it. Give me a little feedback here on what resonated most with you today, an aha moment or a big takeaway or something you're definitely going to be using going forward. It's helpful to see those ideas because what you share might inspire someone else. And that's what leaders do, right? They share out what they're thinking so that it gets other people going. Well, I think I've about wrapped up here. I'm available for questions. Yes, please, let's put up the evaluation link for this one. I'm available for questions or comments if anybody wants. We are ending a little bit early, so that's always nice. It's always good to end a little early, right? You should try to plan it that way.
That's right. Our after action review said we've made extra space for people to get outside and stretch for a minute before the next session. So, and with that reminder in this track and the field traditional skills track in 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes, we have the nutrition and backpacking course. Jesse Satterfield has put together a great presentation on nutrition that Carol is going to lead us through. And then Katie Courier will be joining that session to talk about how packing your backpack for field work is very different than packing your backpack for backpacking. So hopefully some of you will be joining us for that. And Colter, I cannot thank you enough for such a fantastic presentation. I think those three elements come together very nicely, also in a full circle sort of way as you think about approaching your field work. And for many of you, that field season is about to get underway in earnest. Some of you, it might be this fall in the Southwest, but
hey, I want to respond to a comment in the chat there from, again, if I butcher the names, unless you speak for yourself, Rena. You wish that supervisors and leaders maybe above you would use this more. Okay, so here's what I would say. You can lead in place. You start using this stuff in the sphere that you control. You also say to your leader, I just want to make sure I understood your leader's intent. This was the task. This was the purpose. This was the end state. And you extract that from them. They might come and ask you, what is this leader's intent stuff? And you can, oh, well, let me share this with you. But you can lead in place on using this stuff or encouraging those around you to use it. Field briefing checklist. So you can make your own checklist. That you want to make sure each time you know these things, even if you're not the one giving the field briefing, you can make sure you're receiving that information each time, right? And then if you're in an AAR, you can help subtly redirect the group. Hey, I remember we were supposed to be talking about this. Even if that person doing the AAR isn't totally on point with stuff, you can own and help guide the conversation, all right? So that's called leading in place. Even if your leader isn't doing these things exactly, you can be a role model and work within your sphere there. So I want to empower you to think about that.
Additional great points. Thank you, Colter.